Can you see someone's political views in their birth chart? Can you tell if someone is a racist or a bigot if you look at their horoscope? And what exactly determines astrologically whether we lean to the left of the political spectrum or to the right? In a recent video made by Nakti about the appearance of Venus Nakshatra man, she has stated that Venus is the significator of racism in astrology. Now, Clara is a great astrologer and you should really check out her videos, but when it comes to this particular point, it is a huge misconception about the true role of Venus and how it relates to one's ideology and political views. Now, this is an easy mistake to make because when you look at the most racist nakshatra, it is of course Purvashada, which is located in the middle of Sagittarius, the sign of ideology, and is ruled by Venus. So one might assume that because of that, Venus is the significator of racism, but nothing could be further from the truth. Claire also mentioned that it is the job of the female to be selective because while a man can reproduce with multiple females, when it comes to a woman, she can only get pregnant once in a year on average, and it takes quite a while to raise the child, so a woman must be by necessity far more choosy. Now, this is quite correct, but it misses another very important factor when it comes to human reproduction. You see, the equality of the sexes was achieved only in the 20th century, where females were emancipated and given the same status as men. If you look even 100 years prior to that, you will see that in practically every society, women were considered not on par with men and was still to get married, a woman, or more precisely a woman's family, had to pay the groom a dowry. Now, why would that be the case if the woman is the one choosing the mate? Now, this is where the misconception arises. When we look at today's world, of course, it is the girl that says yes or no to the guy who is approaching her. But when you think about most of human history, females outnumbered men by quite a large percentage. Why, you might ask? Well, because men were dying far more frequently due to brawls, wars, and well, quite a number of other things. Basically, their lives were far more dangerous. In fact, when you look at the most egalitarian societies of the ancient world, which is the nomadic peoples of Asia, or the Vikings, or the Celts, you see that the women were also participating in fights and by necessity dying, and this is why they had a far more equal status. Well, when you have less men and less women, of course, there is more equality. But now to contrast this, if you look at ancient Greece or at nomadic Bedouin society, both of these have only the men fighting and hence dying, and you have quite a bit more misogyny because, again, you have far more women, so the men can be far more choosy. Now, this is the reason for the veils in Muslim society, which, by the way, also existed in Greece, and for the whole concept of arranged marriage throughout the world. Because when you can pay someone to marry your daughter, obviously she comes from a wealthy family, and a wealthy family is not wealthy by accident, at least not in the mindset of the ancients who knew about the consequences of genes far more than we might imagine. Basically, if you look at what they wrote, you'll find mentions of a good breed or from a good household. Now, why would that be important? Because when you have agriculture, you can see the effects of genetics even if you don't know what genes are. So they assume that if a woman comes from a good family, the children will also be successful. So it is quite the opposite of the argument that the woman was the one selecting the mate. It was in fact the male. Now, why would men be so choosy? I mean, when you look at how men behave today, they really don't have a problem sleeping around with multiple women, or do they? But there is a caveat to that, because when you look at traditional societies, it is not the groom who chooses the intended bride. It is his father, the head of the family, that chooses for him. And that father doesn't care about the raging hormones of the youth. He cares about the grandchildren. Now, astrologically speaking, we might equate the youth with the raging hormones to Mars. But when it comes to the husband and the family man, that would be Jupiter. And coincidentally, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is the natural ninth house, the house of the father, the house of ideology, and by consequence, the house of choosing. On the other hand, the planet which represents women, Venus, rules the natural second house, which represents family and assets, and the seventh house of partnership and of commerce. Now, when you think about it, you don't really choose your family, and when it comes to dealing with others in the marketplace, everyone is an equal. It only cares about how much money you have in your pocket, not about the color of your skin. So, why would Venus be representative of discrimination, or worse, racism? And even when you think about it biologically, a man cares about how a woman looks. A woman cares about how successful is the man, not how beautiful he is. So, which one of them would care more about race and genetics? If we look at Hindu mythology, it is again easy to make the mistake that it is Venus that represents racism because of the Venus avatar, Parashurama, which was the most genocidal of them all, of course. He literally wiped out the Kshatriyas, according to the myth. So, why wouldn't you assume that it is Venus that represents racism? Well, because it wasn't a true genocide. He wasn't trying to wipe out an ethnicity. He was trying to wipe out the ruling class. Now, class warfare isn't about uh, racism. It isn't a Nazi ideology, for example. It is a communist one. And you can also see the same ideology in his modern counterpart, Che Guevara, who was, of course, a communist and was fighting for the oppressed people of Africa and Latin America, leading revolutions. Another important mythological figure is Shukra, Venus himself. Now, Shukra was the guru of the Asuras, but his goal wasn't to wipe up the Devas, wasn't to annihilate the entire race, but instead to make the Asuras equals. It was in fact Indra and the Devas that were the superior ones, the master race, quite literally so. Now, this is quite important, and we'll come back to that later. But as you can see, when it comes to analyzing the mythology of Venus, again, I'm not facing any form of actual racism, but of class warfare. Now, when it comes to an avatar, which represents superiority in every sense of the word, we must look at the Vamana avatar, not at Parashurama. Now, first of all, he was a Brahmin. Second of all, he was the only avatar that didn't kill anyone. He was too good for that. And lastly, he was the only avatar to defeat his enemy by literally stepping on him like he was a cockroach. Now, if this doesn't represent superiority, I don't know what does. The same can be said about Brihaspati, Jupiter himself. Now, according to mythology, Brihaspati is actually superior to Indra because Indra listens to him, and he is the leader of the Devas, or more precisely the guru of the Devas, the Brahmin of the Devas, the highest of the highest. So as you can see, there is quite a distinction between the mythology surrounding Venus and the mythology surrounding Jupiter. Now, let's get back to astrology for a minute. If we look at Venus, it is exalted in the natural 12th house, Pisces. Now, the 12th house is the house of foreign lands and foreigners. But where is Jupiter exalted? In the natural 4th house, Cancer. In the homeland, surrounded by his family. So, I'll ask again, which of them is a xenophobe? Now, in Hindu mythology, the Asuras are basically the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones that break the rules, the progressives, if you will. And again, Venus is the leader. On the other hand, the conservatives, the ones that are stuck in their ways, the elitists, are the devils. They don't want to relinquish their power. And their leader is Indra, who listens to Brihaspati, Jupiter. So as you can see, the divide is not only between who is the communist and who is the Nazi, but also between who is the progressive and who is the conservative. You can also apply the same logic to economy. You see, when it comes to socialism versus capitalism, now Jupiter is, of course, more increase, so he is the capitalist. At the same time, it is Venus that is about the scales, about being equal. Venus is actually representative of communism. And we can also see that in the results of both of them. Because when you look at capitalism, it naturally produces an elite, very few select individuals who have enormous amounts of wealth, Jupiterian amounts of wealth. But in communism, everyone is equal. Everyone has the same amount of wealth. But at the same time, there is a downside to that, because when you have equality, everyone is mediocre. Only when you have the opportunity to be better than someone else can you see the development of excellence. And you also see that reflected in the mythology, because you see time and again Shukra trying to fight for his people, yet at the end of the day, for all of their flaws, all of their hubris, the devas win. Now, this is not a political statement, it's just an observation, so make of it what you will. But there is a case to be made about competition producing progress. On the other hand, there's also quite an important lesson to be learned from that mythology, because we can also see that when things become too unequal, you get the likes of Parashurama and you get genocide. Remember I said that Purvashada was the most racist nakshatra? Well, why would that be the case? When you think about it, you realize that it is a combination of your ideology, Jupiter and the natural 9th house Sagittarius, with the aspect of beauty, Venus. Now, when you combine ideology with beauty, or even more precisely appearance, that's when things get really complicated, because now you do judge people by the color of their skin, for example. It is part of their appearance. You all of a sudden judge who are the most beautiful, who are the best, in terms of what you see. So it makes sense that this particular nakshatra will stand out. But it has an Achilles heel, which is why it is Purvashada, the early victory, and not Uttarashada, the later victory. Now, that Achilles heel is far from trivial. You see, when it comes to racism and genetic selection, it's actually a double-edged sword. When you try to develop something like eugenics, or an overemphasis of a single genetic group, as in inbreeding, you actually set yourself up for extinction. Let's look, for example, at the ideas of Nazism, that the German race is superior to everyone else, and that it should be cleansed of all other influences. Well, when you look at it from a biological standpoint, it would have been a good idea at first, because you are promoting only the set of genes that is closest to you. So you are, in theory, more likely to produce the next generation. But as soon as even a single plague comes, you have the problem of the entire population being homogeneous genetically. So it will simply be wiped out. So, at first, it seems like you will be the ones to inherit the earth if you are the superior race. But in reality, you will be the first to go extinct. Now, the complete opposite biological effect can be observed in a person with mixed race, because not only is the immune system far better than the ancestral one, because it has more input, more capabilities, but also because there is what is called an overachiever effect. Usually, a person of mixed race will exhibit a higher intelligence than the median quotient of the parent populations. So, the offspring of a mixed race is both smarter and is more likely to survive. Remember the exaltation of Venus in the 12th house? Well, here is how it works in real life, in biology. With all of that being said, it's not like every Purvashara person is a racist, so what exactly would determine someone's political and ideological views? Well, the best example would be Adolf Hitler himself. You see, when it comes to his horoscope, you have Moon in Purvashara, of course, but it is conjunct Jupiter, the elitist, and Ketu, the one without the head, the one who loses control. So, his elitism was literally out of control. In the case of Louis Farrakhan, another person with extremely racist views, one can again find Jupiter heavily afflicted, this time both by Ketu and by Mars. If we look at the chart of Woodrow Wilson, this time Jupiter is afflicted not by Ketu, but by Rahu, which doesn't make anything better. And also his moon, which is opposite Saturn, if I remember correctly, is, guess where? Purvashara. So as you can see, when it comes to heavy Jupiter affliction, especially by Ketu, one can expect very extremist views. Now, what type of views? Well, if it is Jupiter, then it is supremacy. But if it is Venus, and you will find many socialists with this combination, it is actually all about equity. Everyone being equal, even if it means everyone being equal by force. For example, a name you will often hear alongside Hitler's is Mussolini. Now, Benito Mussolini was the inventor of fascism, which people often think means something like white supremacy or racism. No, it actually doesn't. You see, unlike Nazism, which emphasized the superiority of a single race or a group of races, fascism was all about the superiority of a nation, in this case the Italian nation. And unlike the Nazi ideology, in this case your race didn't matter. So for example, if you are a foreigner coming to live in fascist Italy, as long as all you do is for the benefit of Italy, then you are equal to every other Italian. Another thing to note is that fascism is actually a type of socialism. The difference between fascism and communism isn't in the economic ideology. The economic ideology was basically the same. The difference was that in communism it was class warfare, as in it doesn't matter which nationality you are, it doesn't matter which race you are, all that matters is that you work for a living. Fascism was almost the same, but the important part wasn't that you work for a living, but that you work for your country. Now, it is important to note that Benito Mussolini, like Che Guevara, had a Jupiter-Venus conjunction. And again, this is a thing that you will often find in those who promote at least some type of socialism. In contrast to the Venus-Jupiter combination, a combination between Jupiter and Mars can be found in the charts of quite a few prominent capitalists, such as J.P. Morgan or John D. Rockefeller. Now, should this be surprising? Of course not, because they are basically all about achieving greatness through accumulation of wealth. They are all about competing with others to earn their wealth, not being equal to everyone else. Now, these two combinations actually reveal the difference between the ideas of the economic right and the ideas of the economic left. The ideas of the economic right are always about being able to compete and achieve greatness, while the ideas of the economic left are all about being able to provide for everyone. So, to sum everything up, when it comes to the economic ideologies of socialism versus capitalism, one should look at Venus versus Mars, competition versus equality. When it comes to the ideas of progressivism versus conservatism, it's all about Venus versus Jupiter. When it comes to bigotry, extremism, and racism, one should look at afflictions to Jupiter and to the sign of Sagittarius, especially if the Moon or any other planet is located in Purva Ashara. I hope you will find this video useful. Please like and subscribe, and if you wish to learn more about medical astrology and astrology in general, please check out my website. You will find the link below. Thank you.